Hello. We are in week 3. So for week 3 PowerPoint, we are going to be talking about the construction of the LO. You're going to be moving into writing your first PLA outline, is what we call it, PLA. It's an outline, and you'll see there are examples on Foxtail of what a PLA outline looks like. And it needs to be your section 3, which is abstract generalizations. Your section 3 will be completely written out. So when I say completely written out, I mean 2 to 3 pages long. And for the rest of the sections, which would be concrete, observations and reflections, and application in new situations, those sections will be bullet pointed. So you are just kind of going to get an idea of what you're going to talk about. And the reason I do that is because any information that you change in the abstract generalizations, if you change anything, which you will, right, because I'm going to give you feedback. So whatever changes you make there changes what goes in the other sections. So for example, if you have an LO about vulnerability, right, and you are writing about the importance of vulnerability to deeper relationships, and all of a sudden you, in discussing, hey, this really more sounds like you're talking about, making eye contact. Eye contact is key to developing deeper relationships, because as I'm reading your support, I kind of just see a lot of, talking about, verbal cues or eye contact and making that connection, face to face. And I realize you're not really talking about vulnerability, you're talking about eye contact. Well, now that changes your LO, and so it's going to change the words that are going in your concrete, in your observations, and again in future situations. So to save you the trouble of that, I just want you to write out section 3 and kind of bullet point the other sections. I'm going to briefly go over the process, and then we will kind of dive into what, like how to construct the LOs. So you have your LOs, right? We're going to talk about them in a minute. But then when you go to concrete, these are the bullet points I need you to think about. Concrete section 1, you are going to be talking about how you learned your LO. So if I'm talking about, okay, vulnerability is key to a deeper relationship, in my concrete, I'm going to think back, gosh, during my window of when I moved from a new school, I moved neighborhoods, right? And I'm taking my kids to a new school, and I am not really connecting with anyone. I'm not getting to know anyone, right? I'm not going to be talking about where I came from or experiences from the past, right? My transformation happens when I moved. So therefore, the new learning begins, right? So I could talk about how I would go to, let's say, pick up my kids from school, kind of stood alone, didn't really get to meet anybody, came home kind of alone, isolated. Then I did a Google search, right? It's not like how I was feeling. It was just like that is just like the matter of fact. I was isolated, right? I wasn't feeling isolated, but I was isolated from people. So there's a difference. So remember not to focus on the details of the situation, not how we're feeling, right? So coming home, not making any friends, was reading a book about, I watched a TED Talk on Brene Brown, right? That's a very common, very famous talk about vulnerability. So I watched a TED Talk by Brene Brown, who was specifically talking about vulnerability, and I decided I'm going to try this. So then, next week, got some courage, decided it was okay if I didn't make friends, but I decided to go ahead and reach out, say hello, invite someone to coffee. I invited somebody to coffee. I could say that. I invited somebody to coffee. They accepted. We then moved on, to a deeper relationship as like through sharing and whatnot. But your concrete is specifically just talking about how did you learn the importance of your LO. So you can see why you need to have your LO established before you can even write about how you learned it. Do you see that? So that's why I want section 3 completely written out. Okay, so that's kind of like the nuts and bolts of concrete experience, just talking about the information. Observations and reflections. A lot of people are, it's easy because that's like, oh, I get to talk about my feelings. This is where I get to reflect and think back. So yes, section 1, information. Section 2, what was that like for you going through that experience of learning this LO? Gosh, it was really hard. It was hard to come home from picking up my kids and not really getting to know some of the moms and dads and parents, grandparents, aunts that are in our community. I really wanted to feel connected. I wanted to feel like I belong, that this is going to be, you know, an extended family. That was really hard. Once I learned and tried out my vulnerability, it was relieving. I was so relieved because I was courageous. I made a connection with a friend, and now I have a person. I have a person, and that one person turned into, you know, 5 people. Now have 5 like solid people in my circle. That is what section 2 is all about. We're not going to retell our story, right? Because you've already told it in concrete. You're just going to focus and making your feelings or observations like your topic sentences or your thesis statement, and then give a little detail explaining it, you know, one paragraph at a time. And you will, you can also reflect back, saying, looking back, I realized I was just scared. I was scared of rejection. You know, that's a reflection, and I can kind of talk a little bit about that. And that's okay too, right? But we're not going to rehash the story we're already telling. We're just focusing on the feelings and the reflections. So that is section 2, observations and reflections. We're going to go back into abstract generalizations in a moment. So section 4 is going to focus on how you use your LO in the future, right? So I could say, you know, when my son joined a new soccer club, I was able to use my vulnerability, you know, method to create deeper relationships by reaching out to Liam's parents, and I introduced myself and let them know a little bit about myself, and we became, you know, close by having conversations at every practice and eventually at the games, and our families became really close, and we did, you know, we'd celebrate 4th of July together, right? It was like a specific situation of how I used it, my LO, in a new situation. Now, there could be a possibility that you don't have that new situation yet, and that's okay. You can talk about how you would use it in a future situation. So if you are, you know, a lot of students write about management, and so if you are new to management, that was a transformational experience, and maybe you haven't done, you know, switched jobs or been put in another manager position. And so you can say, you know, in the future, when I, you know, if I were to change positions, I would know exactly what kind of manager I would be right away by installing, you know, this team lead dynamic, or, you know, one-on-one meetings on a weekly basis. Whatever your LO is, like, you can say that also. So that's an option. So that is kind of the 4 sections. And as you can see, if you change your LO or content in your LO, it will change the stories across the board. So I will get more into this next week, but I like to look at it this way, linear, because if you change an LO, it changes the rest of your story. So that's why I bullet point. Okay, moving on to the PowerPoint. So just a couple things I wanted to share, just to kind of give those, you know, general overview of the essay structure. But since we are focusing specifically on section 3, just wanted you to see how things can shift. So section 3, I'm going to screen share here so you can see my PowerPoint. Okay, just make it big here. Sorry about that. Okay. So learning window, it needs to happen as an adult. So we're talking about the learning window, like your experience, the experience that you're writing about. So right now you've done the cold model, right? And you have this experience. So moving that cold model into an outline format now, we're thinking about my learning window, whatever my transformational experience is, did it happen as an adult? Because we're following the cold model adult theory. So it doesn't work if it's not an adult learning experience. You can't really follow the adult learning model. So make sure 18 plus adult. Has to be transformational, which means new learning took place, right? You didn't know it yet. So if you like forgot or you learned it in a course, like that does not apply here. It has to be new learning, something you didn't know, because then you can explain in your concrete, right, in your story experience, you can explain how you didn't know something and kind of the process for how you figured out your LO. So that's why it has to be new. It can't be from a class or receive previous credit. That does not work. This is personal learning experience. So personal or professional, which we don't focus on the professional in this course. We focus on the personal. So must be an event that has already happened at least a year ago. And the reason why is it gives you time to process using the cold model. You don't want to use your time now in 8 weeks to process how you've, reflecting on and what you've learned. That is exhausting. And so it needs to be far enough away that you've had time to process and you can look back with a clear lens. And the last thing is your story and your LOs cannot overlap one another. So they need to be separate, right? So if you use the vulnerability method to deeper relationship concept, if you use that LO in an essay, you can't use that LO in another essay. And I will help you with that because sometimes you might even do it and you don't even realize. And so I'll say, ooh, this LO is really similar to, an LO you used in essay 1. We need to revise or rethink. So also thinking about learning windows, sometimes they can be too big. So I've had students who are military and they did their training, and when they were dispatched to their location. Now that is a huge learning window because that is like 5 years or something like that. And so I said, you can break that up and have your training be one essay and your, dispatched to whatever location you're at as a second essay. You just need to make sure that, each essay has 3 to 5 learning outcomes and that the LOs don't overlap. So that's a possibility. So if you are doing something large scale, think about how you might be able to split that up into 2 if you want, just to keep the learning window small enough so you have the 3 to 5 learning outcomes and not overlapping experiences. Okay. So abstract, which is something that is not the abstract generalization. So in an essay, you write an abstract in the essay format. And it is just a really short paragraph. And the reason we have it is for APA format, usually you have an APA format in place for research purposes. So people can, research, family dynamics. And they can look up all these, articles and essays, and they can read the abstract, which just gives you a short overview of what the whole essay is about. And then you can say, oh yeah, this is something that I need for my research, or nope, not even close, and you move on. So that is what this is. It's just a small little abstract, gives your audience a little bit of information on your essay. And really, it's very specific. It is just, it goes after the title page. It follows APA format, which is in the template, and it has just like 2 sentences about your experience. In 2019, I moved from Markham neighborhood to Maplewood neighborhood. And then that's it. Like that's my transformation. And I write my LOs straight out. I learned that vulnerability is key to deep relationships. I learned that, your 3 to 5 LOs, word for word. That's it. The end. Done. Next page. You guys, I'm reporting for work. Where's Daddy? Did he already leave? Okay. You need to find something quiet to do right now. Please? Okay. Thank you. And you see them in examples. You see the abstract in student essay examples. So that's it. So here's an example, right? Walk in Freedom is a CD I wrote. And then you can see it just goes straight into management and then just 2 sentences. And then I learned that, I learned that, I learned that. 3 LOs, word for word, copy, paste, period, the end, done. So that's all it is. Okay, quickly, APA format for this essay is title page, abstract, which we just covered, the essay, which has all 4 sections, references, and remember, you only use references if they're used in your essay. You list them. If you use them for reading and you don't talk about them in your essay, you do not need to put them in your references sheet. So references and then documentation. Don't worry about the documentation right now. We will get into that more. It's just a way to show your experience, pictures, email, and I can help you with that too as you are figuring that out. So don't worry about this format is not the format we're following for the outline, just giving you some heads up information of what's to come. Okay, so now we're focusing on the outline, right? Your outline has section 3, all written out, 2 to 3 pages. So focusing on now you've written the cold model, you've kind of shared some learning, what you've, takeaways, learning takeaways. And now we're going to use those learning takeaways and make them into an LO, an abstract generalization learning outcome. So what needs to happen is you have to have a method and a concept. So I learned that accountability is the best way to achieve fitness goals. I guarantee you're going to write an LO that says, I learned how to achieve fitness goals. It's just natural, right? When we ask like, how did you, what did you get from this? Well, I really learned how to achieve fitness goals from running my very first 5K. And people are like, oh, wow, cool. But can they go and do that based on what you just said? No, they can't. You need to tell them how you learned to achieve fitness goals, right? I learned that accountability helped me achieve fitness goals. Like, oh, tell me more about that. Why is accountability important? Well, accountability is important because you're not alone. You're doing it with someone else, right? Somebody else to get you up in the morning, somebody else to push you, somebody else to say, hey, don't give up. Like accountability is important. And the reason why we need to see your method is because it's different for each individual. Like I said last week, if you take 4 people and say, hey, how do you achieve fitness goals? 4 people are going to say something different, right? That's what makes you the professional. And you have to think, well, gosh, based on my experience, how did I find fitness goals to be true, to be relevant? Oh yeah, I was able to achieve them because I had, a running buddy, or I had a fitness coach. I had somebody helping me, and that kept me going. Okay, so that's my LO, right? Maybe somebody else said achieving fitness goals was making a plan, right? I learned that planning out my weekly goals help me achieve fitness goals, and that person's going to talk about how important writing out weekly goals is to achieving their fitness goals. So it's important to know specifically how you did it because you're the professional in this essay. So just to keep in mind, your LOs cannot double dip. And when I say double dipping, you can't use the same method to for all your LOs, and you can't really use the same concept goal, because when you think about a class, a course, and you think about those learning objectives that you see in syllabus and like in a syllabi, it's not they don't have the same concept taught in different ways. They have several different concepts taught. So you do need 3 to 5 different concepts, and then have 3 to 5 different LOs to match those concepts. Just keep that in mind. And there needs to be a method and a concept, because it's showing a relationship, like how to achieve this is through this. This helps achieve this. There needs to be a relationship, because that's kind of what you talk about in your support. So it needs to stand alone, meaning it needs to be teachable, right? If I learned that listening is the best way to reach clients, right? Reaching clients is an important concept in business, in real estate. And how do you reach clients, right? Each realtor, each, business owner or manager sales manager, right? They might have a different method to reaching this concept. And so that's why this is important. And this is important because this is the academic piece. And this is important because it helps achieve it. So if you take away the I learned that, it still stands alone. It can be like an article, heading to an article. Listening is the best way to reach clients. You're like, ooh, I know. And it makes it teachable because you're telling someone how to do it, how to go find out more information. You're not just saying like, oh, through this experience, I really learned how to reach clients. You're like, oh, cool. That's really awesome. But do you know how to go do that after they tell you that? No, you have no idea. You're like, oh, yeah, Jessica reached clients. You're like, cool. How do you do that? I have no idea, right? But if your LO is Jessica learned that through listening, it's a great way to reach clients, and be like, oh, hey, yeah, Jessica learned that reaching clients, the best way to do that is through listening. Like now I have a skill set that I could look into, I could research, I could try. But before, if you don't have that method, you don't have the how-to, you don't know how to do it. So that is the whole point of creating that abstract LO, so that I can think, hey, if I want to reach somebody, and it doesn't necessarily have to be clients, it could just be like, I want to connect with someone. The best way to do that is through listening. And that can be, used in church leadership, that can be used through friendship, that can be used in family, that could be used at work, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a doctor, whether you're, any electrician, it doesn't matter. That skill set can still translate. That's the abstract part. It can translate to any department, but it's specifically designed for your experience into, say business. Okay, so here are a couple LOs, right? I had to learn to communicate effectively. I had to control my emotions and not let them get the better of me. I learned to compromise so an end result can be achieved. These are kind of learning outcomes that you have when you just are talking about an experience. They're not abstract, right? But you realize, hey, these are all learning outcomes that could fall under a communications department, right? I learned about these things. This is right now thinking about your cold model. I have LOs from my experience, and they fall under one department. What department is it, right? Same thing with sociology. I learned to hold my plans loosely and rely on God, or I learned to expand my definition of family. I learned to appreciate a new culture. These aren't giving you how-tos yet, right? But okay, these all can fall under a sociology department. I would definitely say that some of these you will have see for this one right here, I learned about his disease and had to advocate for him in a complicated healthcare system. Like that is what you learn through your experience, but how are you going to phrase it to fall under a sociology department? So that's kind of where it's good to write these all out just as gosh, this is what I learned, because again, I told you last week, I need to help you evaluate it. And so I can't, if you're constantly focusing on how to, write it in an abstract manner, we got to start with step one, which is just learning what you learn from your experience. So, excuse me, church ministry, right? You have some LOs. Again, these are not abstract. They're just giving you ideas of like how to kind of put them under one department. And you're like, okay, I've got this. All right. Psychology, same thing. Like, oh, my learning experience, my learning that I have really would resonate in a psychology department. Okay, good. Business, same thing, right? So you have that step one. That's where we should be with the cold model, right? You have a list of learning that happened from your experience. Now we got to bump it to LOs. So we talked about how I learned that in order, to be vulnerable, a person must be courageous. So here is my method, right? Here is my concept. So now, like, that's where we need to go. Is the next step is create the learning outcome. Then the third piece, which we've already talked about how to create an LO, is your support. Now, it's kind of wonky because this lens is very much an academic lens. It is not talking about your situation at all. Why? Because you already talked about your situation, or you're going to talk about your situation in your concrete. This is just the academic piece. This is like the nuts and bolts of your essay. You will be given credit based on this. This is the biggest, most important section of the whole entire essay. So the reason why is it shows critical thinking skills, higher order thinking, taking your experience and making it academic and teachable. So that's why this section is so important. So if you notice, looking at the slide, my tone here, or the student's tone, is not, this is my example, yeah. So my tone here is not talking about my experience whatsoever, whether I'm talking about like a situation with my family or moving to a different neighborhood. You don't hear that in this at all in the support. It is very much an academic lens, like I'm giving a presentation, right? I'm presenting to the faculty and defending my experience and saying how it relates to college level learning. I am just focusing on the method and how and why it's important to the concept. That's all I'm doing, right? Vulnerability takes strength and courage. I'm just explaining the importance of vulnerability and how that relates to courage. And so that's kind of paragraph one. Paragraph two would be where you would, this is in my opinion, you don't have to, it's not required, but that's where I would get some outside research. So here I would put in some information that I learned from my Brene Brown video. I would put that right in here because here's why. It validates your claim. It makes it harder for a faculty member to not support you or agree with you. Because this is right up here is kind of your thought process. And here's where you're pulling in some credibility. You're saying, not only do I believe this, but so does Brene Brown. She says it right here. And she's an established, social, researcher. Like that's valid. And it validates you. So it makes it harder for them not to give you credit. Plus, you've already connected all those dots. Like you've taken your example, your story, you've made it into an abstract LO. You have an academic, defense, and then you go and you bring in credibility. Like, wow, that's what you want to see in all 3 to 5 of your LOs. And this has nothing to do with you or your story. It's just how you've processed it and how it relates to college level learning. So here's another example. I learned that identifying strengths and weaknesses is key to team dynamics, right? So my concept, team dynamics, totally would learn that at a college level course in, business. And strengths and weaknesses is my personal method. Like that's what I learned, that it's so important to understand that for me to have a solid, understanding of team dynamics. And I just talk about, again, strengths and weaknesses and team dynamics. Like why are they important to one another? And what can a person gain from it? And then here, I would pull in academic backing. I made it up. Like this is just something I made up. But it's important. to throw that in there. So that's what yeah. I think I mixed up the bottom. Oh, I've copied this example. I apologize. I will delete that from the Foxtail site. So yeah, right here, this part, I'm gonna get rid of this, sorry, there. That makes more sense, I'm so sorry. So there you go. That is what you wanna see, where it's just, you know, your personal understanding of how the relationship works, and then right here, your academic support. Now again, you don't have to do it, it's just something that I highly recommend because it validates you, that's all. Okay, so starting points for creating these LOs. Do you have a department in mind, right? We go back to all those department slides. Do your 3 to 5 LOs, do they fall under one department? Okay, check 1. Do you have a method and concept idea, right? Do you have a how-to to the method, right? Does your LO stand alone? Can a person take your LO and know what to do, right? If you tell them like, oh, I learned about team dynamics. Okay, great. I can't turn around and do that, right? But if I learned to evaluate strengths and weaknesses and that helps with team dynamics, oh, okay, I can turn around and go do that. I can evaluate strengths and weaknesses and figure out how that helps me with team dynamics. So you need that method. Can they apply your method to a similar situation, right? If I'm thinking about team dynamics, that could be sports related, that could be church related, that can be family related. It's a more abstract idea, and I can take that evaluating strengths and weaknesses and apply that to that situation. So that's the goal in your LO. And then thinking about your academic support. Do you have an academic lens, right? Your support needs to sound like a presentation, and it needs to have your experience removed from it, because you're going to already talk about your experience in the concrete. It would just be super repetitive if you kept it in there. So it's the 4 sections are highlighting your story, but in a different way, as you notice. Like concrete, you're explaining what happened. Observations and reflections, you're talking about what it was like for you while you were going through it. Looking back, what do you notice now that you didn't notice then? You know, abstract generalizations is your academic, focus. How is this related to college level learning? Prove that your experience, your LOs are worthy of college credit, right? And then section 4 is how you've applied these in new situations. You've got, for each LO, you have a new situation and explaining how you've used your LO in that format. So, hope that was helpful and you're not too overwhelmed. We have some starting points, right? How to create those LOs and how to create that LO support. That is what is due in your outline. I want the whole section 3 written out, right? 2 to 3 pages. Essay format, like it's just a chunk of your essay written out exactly how it should look if you were to turn it in, right, for credit. That's what I want to see. Okay, that's all I have. Please let me know if you need anything. Reach out. Oh, I can stop screen sharing. There we go. Let me know how I can help. If you want to set up a time to go over your experience, go over your outline as you're working through it this week, or even after, if you want to make your evaluation like a phone chat, we can make that happen. Just email me, let me know the best way to support to fully understand your outline. And for your essay 1, getting going, you can do this. Have a great week.